Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel session From Crisis to Innovation, Rethinking Estates Across the NHS and Higher Education. I'm Georgina Carter, and I'm going to be chairing the session today on behalf of Esri UK. Before we get going, just wanted to point out a couple of housekeeping things. So mics and cameras for all participants will be turned off throughout the session. We will have time for an allocated Q&A in the last few minutes of the session, so please submit any questions via Slido. There's details on joining in the chat and on the screen now. And finally, today's panel session will be recorded, and it'll be shared with you later on this week so you can catch up or rewatch any of the session. So I'd now like to offer a warm welcome to our panelists who are joining us for the discussion today from across the NHS and higher education. If I could come to you briefly, each of you, for a quick introduction, that would be fantastic. So if we start with you, Kay.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Kay Mulcahy. I'm the Associate Director for Estates Operations at NHS England. I cover hard FM, soft FM, estates workforce, digitisation of the estate and productivity as my main areas of focus. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kay. And David?
Hi, I'm David Bailey, Head of Digital Estates for Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. My role is leading on most things digital for our estates and facilities teams. My team manages SaaS systems. We develop bespoke in-house solutions, Power BI dashboard apps. And we're looking to digitalise estates and facilities processes and generally looking to make data more accessible to our teams.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. And we'll come to you next, Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick Campbell-Voigt. I'm the founder and managing director of BIS Consult. So we build information solutions and we help our clients to create data-driven smart estates.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nick. And finally, last but not least, Brett.
Morning all, my name is Brett Plant. I'm the Head of Estates Information Systems at the University of Warwick. My team cover a number of options from looking at the BIM processes, CAFM solutions, a lot of those estate systems and data sets, and looking at how we can make them accessible, improve their quality and effectively improve the processes across the estates department.
Brilliant. Thank you all for joining us today. And we'll now move into the panel discussion. So we'll start with exploring some of the key challenges. So I'd like to come to you first, Kay, to discuss your view on what key estates challenges the NHS is facing nationally.
So thank you for that. I suppose when I looked at this, I consider the first thing that came into my mind was the consideration of the Lord Darcy report, which was published last September, and that highlights some key significant activity within that and relevant issues. And from anybody working within NHS estates, I don't think anything was a surprise from that report, but it was good to get it down in sort of black and white and for it to be understood in the context across the nation, really. So NHS estates nationally, regionally and locally faces this ever-aging sort of infrastructure. So the ageing estate is a massive issue in respect of the NHS, as it is for other sectors as well. So Darcy highlighted in his report 11.2 billion backlog associated with our estate. That was back in September, and then in October we had the ERIC return data, which demonstrated this had increased to 13.8 billion across our estate. So as we move forward, our backlog gets bigger and the investment into our infrastructure gets less. So this leads to investment and financial constraints, and we have a recognised shortfall of capital allocation, which is still ongoing. Financial constraints are huge at the moment. So these financial pressures obviously dictate what we can do from a delivery point of view, and we have mandated net zero targets within the NHS, none of which sort of help address the backlog. So the financial constraints, mandated activity, and our ageing estate obviously impact heavily across the NHS of what we can do. Some of the key challenges, therefore, we look at space utilisation as a real sort of lever, I would say, and it's a key consideration because it does link to that backlog. So anywhere where we can remove unfit for purpose estate or that we don't need anymore, disposals, etc., is a real good way of focusing investment moving forward for our estate. So if we can remove a estate that's unfit for purpose, then we can maximise the estate that we have and the technology and digital technology that we put in from an innovative perspective. Lord Carter in 2016 asked for a reduction from 42%, I think it was, to 33% of non-clinical estate. And that was achieved as of the returns of last year. And there's an ambition moving forward to reduce that further to 30%. So really emphasising the use of clinical estate and reducing and using the space for non-clinical estate to a much better sort of way forward. It helps minimise some of the challenges in backlog. If we're not using the state, then we don't have the buildings to address, but it's not an easy task by any means whatsoever. But obviously any disinvestment into buildings will help tailor the investment into digital for the buildings that are going to be kept and used. So I suppose that's like the consideration of the infrastructure. And as in building estates, when we look to a move to digital transformation, there are some other key challenges, specifically technology integration and advancement. So the move from analog to digital, as is announced through the Labour government now, and trying to work with some legacy estate that's just not equipped for this type of integration. So retrofitting digital technology into old buildings doesn't necessarily equate. So when digitalisation is discussed, the estates arena, in the estates arena, it's clear to see that there's no actual real consistent modelling for our transition and transformation to smart buildings and intelligent hospitals, particularly in the legacy estate, which is probably my key focus. The new hospital programme is out there as well, but it's slightly different arena in the fact that it's designing for the new. So it's designing for hospitals that are not necessarily built yet. And although our ambitions are the same across the new hospital programme and the legacy estate, our journeys in getting there are absolutely different. I think there are different categories to factor in when we look at both sides of the coin, so to speak. So we need to make sure that everything that we do is interoperable to old estate and new estate, and make sure that what we've got in place, the workforce is also interoperable, should I say. So we have to go back to basics to some extent, and I'll talk about that in a bit, but we need to ensure that those basics are covered off first: asset registers in every hospital, CAFM systems that work and do what we expect them to do, and guidance documents that are supporting that. So entwined with all of this is the estates workforce. I've mentioned that already, and the challenges that that brings. So NHS Estates and Facilities Services has an ageing workforce. 48% of our workforce is above 55. That's not to say that there's not some great innovation in some of those teams. However, we have less than 4% under 25. So we need to do something to ensure that our workforce is digitally enabled for the future as well. So considering this transformation to digital, there is a lot of work to do about changing a culture and getting buy-in from the users. And that demonstrates sort of the benefits that digitalisation can bring and encourage for a way forward. So there's a recognised shortfall of digital experts, I would say, in NHS estates. And we have to address this so that there's a framework for digital literacy. And we need to cover that off to ensure that not only do we advance our infrastructure through the technology and systems, but we also advance our workforce to manage that as well. Okay. That was all I was going to say there, Georgina. Thanks.
Thank you, Kay. No, a fantastic overview of the key challenges. And it'd be great now to come to you, David, to see from your perspective and a trust perspective if these challenges resonate with you or if there's any other key challenges that are relevant at a trust level.
Yeah, thanks, Georgina. There are many, and agree with all of those points really that Kay's raised. I think it's a similar picture at national and trust level, and I think as well there's going to be some work done on digital maturity assessments. So it's kind of a starting point for trust to kind of start to look at where they are in terms of their digital maturity at this point. And I think that would be a really good piece of work to support. I think, you know, if we need to understand the NHS estate in its entirety. So we need to bring all the trusts along on this digital journey and not leave any behind. But for MFT specifically, I would say modernisation is one of those challenges that Kay has touched upon. But for MFT, our North Manchester site has been chosen as one of the Wave 1 NHP scheme, and so a key focus from government is on the implementation of digital technologies within the new hospital programme. And what that means is we've had to start to look at the technologies that are important to us, what impact they'll have on our operating models and our workforce, and which will bring most benefit to the trust. So not all of the digital use cases in NHP are purely estates focused, but they all impact on building design in some way. So if we're using AGVs, for example, we have to think about how those robots will operate, how they'll be maintained, the spaces that they'll use, and how they operate, and even where they recharge. It's all part of the challenge of that's coming up. And then agree, Kay's already said it, but modernising the workforce, the technology doesn't run itself, it assists, it can bring us fantastic insights, but it does mean as well that we just need probably a tweak in staff kind of roles so that they can be a little bit more digitally focused. So I think really exciting time to be working in the area. There are a lot of challenges, and I really think digital can help our teams work more closely in tandem through the sharing of data.
Brilliant, thanks David. I really like what you said there around the entirety of the NHS estate, thinking about it collectively. I think that's a really nice piece. And Brett, coming to you now, from a higher education perspective, obviously there's a lot of similarities between NHS estates and HE in terms of large multi-building estates. So it'd be interesting to get your view on the challenges both Kay and David have highlighted and how they might differ in higher education.
Yeah, no, so firstly, there's a lot of similarities across our sectors. We do a lot of work separately with a group of other universities in a sector-wide initiative, and we see some of the similarities there with some of the NHS participants in that group, especially around some of the things that Kay mentioned earlier, their ageing infrastructure, those operational costs, their preparedness for systems integrations and moving towards smarter buildings. Within HE, it's probably obviously well documented around the financial situation that we're facing. But there's still high student expectations. Students still expect modern, quality facilities for them to learn within, as well as our staffs are also in terms of research spaces and being able to use those for great teaching areas as well. So there's a big challenge within my particular expertise, focusing around kind of that digital transformation. I often think there's a challenge around resourcing, not just financially, but around allowing colleagues the time to gain the skills and the knowledge required for those digital transformation projects. Even on a smaller scale, there's elements of project management skills required, system skills, developing those kind of expertise around understanding new processes. So it's tricky because we're also working to deliver for the rest of our department within estates, which is busy. They're reacting and maintaining an estate and getting their time as well, and allowing them the time to kind of come in and influence some of those change projects. It can be quite difficult. But also from a systems and information perspective, we're working with large amounts of data debt, lots of uncleansed information that may have not been looked after as well as it should have previously, inconsistent data, schemas which may have different references from one system to another. Room numbers is always a big challenge across the sector, and making sure that's consistent across all the different systems that may house that as a data set. Asset information, and a lot of it can be inaccessible as well. We're working with data debt where this is inaccessible. People can't get hold of the information they need when they need it. So there's a big challenge there, and it's often overlooked in some of those prioritizations when looking at strategies for how we improve. It can be overlooked because it's a big challenge and it does require a lot of resource. So we've got a lot of work to do that. We've personally kind of gone around a bit of a gap analysis, looking at those data sets, But again, working across not just the higher education sector, but the colleagues that I spoke to across the NHS as well, um, the challenges are very similar, but each organisation almost has its own bespoke, unique way that it's handled those particular data sets previously, and it can be quite difficult to compare and contrast and look at actually all moving towards the same similar goal, depending on those kind of legacy issues that they faced or legacy kind of ways of working and processes. Um, and of course, that leads us down to then how do we move forward? There's a challenge here from my team to allow that information to be used operationally and strategically to demonstrate how our buildings are performing across our wide campus estates, large number of buildings. How do we show how well our buildings are performing, whether that's space utilisation, whether that's energy usage? How do we allow colleagues to be able to quickly identify trends and patterns, across performances across large estates?
Brilliant, thanks, Brett. I think, there's that balance, isn't there, between the sort of managing the funding and the constraints there, alongside the sort of increasing student expectations and experience side of things. And it's getting that balance right, as well as all the other challenges you highlighted. So thank you for that. And now, Nick, I'd like to come to you, because given the challenges we've already discussed, there's clearly a need to innovate and modernise estates. From the organisations that BIS has worked with, what do you think some of the barriers to innovation in estates management are?
Thanks, Georgina. So yeah, there are obviously plenty of potential barriers to innovation in estates management, and it's really good to hear the thoughts from Kay, David, and Brett. So from the organisations we've worked with as consultants, and specifically from an innovation or digital transformation perspective, we find it helpful to frame the challenges into four main themes, which is data, processes, systems, and people. So starting with data, it's often undervalued as an asset. And as a result, a lot of estates teams don't have the governance or structures in place to maintain that data properly. And it's usually fragmented across multiple systems. So this creates data quality issues and a lack of trust in the data, making it hard to trust or act on the data. So as a result, it's not driving the decisions that it could or should be. So processes are another big barrier. Many of them have evolved over time and are still based on legacy ways of working. So that can lead to inefficiencies, bottlenecks, and a lot of manual effort just to get reports or insights out. In some cases, key information sits with one or two people, which also creates risk and slows everything down. On the system side, many estates are still tied to legacy infrastructure, which can have limited adoption of smart or connected technologies. And even when the appetite is there, integration and funding challenges can often hold things back, as we've heard from others already. So finally, people, there's often a digital skills gap. Kay mentioned this as well. So within estates and FM teams, and there's also a natural resistance to change, especially when new tools or approaches challenge the way that things have always been done. So without investment in training and upskilling, it's hard to move things forward. So while the barriers are real, all these barriers are real, most of them are fixable. I think especially with a focus on improving data quality, streamlining processes, and bringing people along for the journey.
Brilliant, thanks, Nick. I think highlighting those three themes is a really great way of doing it, especially around, obviously, like you said, data quality and data. So I'd like to come back to you now again, Nick. Given how you frame data as one of those key areas of innovation, it'd be great to understand the role that you think data-driven decision making plays in estates management.
Thanks, Georgina. So data-driven decision-making is absolutely central to modern estates management, especially in complex environments like hospitals and universities, which have large, diverse estates, tight budgets. Being able to use data effectively can really help teams to move from a reactive mindset to a more proactive and strategic one. So it's about using data to optimize how space is used, reduce energy consumption, prioritize maintenance, and ultimately make more informed choices about where and how to invest time and money. One idea I like to talk about is something I call organizational clock speed. And basically what I mean by that is how quickly an organization can actually gather insights and then act on them. So the better your data and the better it's managed, the faster and more confident you can make those decisions. So that has a huge impact on efficiency, resilience, and service delivery. But of course, having the data is only half the story. The real value comes from when that data feeds into streamlined processes, and that's where things like automation can really start to make a difference as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. That's really insightful. And staying on the topic of data and sort of data and technology, David, it'd be great to come to you again now to understand the role that data and technology has played in the state's modernisation strategies at MFT.
Yeah, so I'll talk about this from the perspective of the different technologies that we're using, and try and bring in a bit of the benefits. So yeah, we use Microsoft Power Platform. That's quite a key part of our strategy. So we're keen to try and leverage the existing licensing that we've got to keep costs down. So we're not having to go out and necessarily buy things in. We will try and use things like Microsoft Power Apps and so on to develop very kind of focused apps for our teams, bespoke, and that build on their existing processes and try and improve those processes and bring them more kind of functionality. So we recently did that with a waste app that we developed, which essentially takes your waste certificates, reads it, puts the data into a database, and then you can start to use that data. And that saves time for our team who had to manually input the data. And we also removed the fee for a legacy system. And we're actually, as I said before, able to improve the functionality from that legacy system into the new system that we developed. And in that example, it was great because we actually won an award for innovation. But it's a really good example of providing a point solution that's helped to improve our processes that often can be a barrier to improving how we work. CAFAM systems is another technology which people are very familiar with the benefits that they can bring. We've used our system to kind of bring it more sort of as an NHS tool, if you like. And we developed within that system an assurance module to help us manage PAM. So for those who are outside of the NHS, PAM is the premises assurance model, which all trusts have to provide evidence of compliance to NHS standards. So we've used CAFAM system and tried to develop it on a little bit as well. Another technology is data warehousing. So we try and store all of our data on our own servers, which gives us the control of the data to then share it to other systems. So using CAFAM as an example again, so whilst the data is held in our suppliers' servers, we also have a daily download of the data from the system. And then we use SQL to extract the data from the database, and then we can distribute it. So that's all within our control, and that includes sort of site block and room data as an example, which we can then share into other systems, so that those systems are talking the same language of which space or rooms are held in those systems. So you can join any disparate data sets together using the hook of the room information. Sensor technology is something that we're implementing more and more. So I think we're all probably aware of the Internet of Things and IoT, and using those to help monitor our buildings. We're doing this to start to track assets, and we even have a project where we're looking at contact tracing on our wards. So we can start to monitor even the spread of infections, and it's another great example of how two worlds, estates and facilities, and clinical teams can start to bring some data together and sort of work more in tandem. And then finally, we could not mention GIS technology, which is probably the newest technology that we've brought in, and we're using that to build digital twins and bring those different data sets together into one platform so they can be viewed So yeah, I think the trying to remove some of the inefficiency of going into all these different systems, if we can bring it together into one place, then people can start to see that data together. And that's, I was conscious when I was thinking about this question, I'm not advocating for one system that people use. We use a modular approach. There are many different systems that we're bringing those data sets together to make it just more efficient to find the information. So yeah. Those I think that's a roundup of the different things that we're using.
Thank you, David. A fantastic roundup, and I like what you said about trying to bring things together, but equally still having the modular approach as well, and the importance of that. So Brett, it would be interesting now to get your view on how you've been approaching digital transformation across your estate at the University of Warwick.
Yeah, very similar actually to some of the points there made by David, where we focused on 3 key areas as our main projects for digital transformation. David mentioned CAFM solutions there. We're currently going through a project to move and upgrade and enhance our offering within house for our CAFM IDRS solution. Yeah, that's looking at improving those, where those data sets are held, that single source of trust, and those operational processes which our organisation so much relies on for improving our kind of service in reactive maintenance, plan preventive maintenance, and compliance. We're also focused on document management solutions. There's an aim to improve what we are using, and again, how do people access those documents, moving from kind of old network drives and local drives and making them more accessible via solutions such as SharePoint or common data environments, and how we start to get those information files to the people that need them out in the field when they need them. And then one of the third key areas that we focused on so far is our digital campus innovation. And again, following on from Nick's comments there about making those data-driven decision-making environments, that's at the heart of a lot of our thinking when we're kind of working, especially with that digital campus model. Our approach, well, it's been to look at what data already exists. The aim here isn't to create more data. There's already enough of it that we're trying to manage. The data usually exists, and if it exists for a purpose, and understanding what that may be. And then looking at the issue around those data sets. I mentioned data debt earlier. It may be that it's silos, it's only accessible to certain people. It's hidden on a spreadsheet. It's hidden in a system only 10 people have access to. Dare I say, it's in somebody's mind, and when they leave the organisation, all the knowledge leaves with them. So it's understanding what data sets are important to us, and then looking at why we need them and what the benefits would be for bringing them into one centralised platform. And that's where we look at the GIS solutions for our digital campus. Everything we move in must have an operational or strategic benefit, a reporting benefit, to help us understand our campus performance. So we looked at creating a roadmap. We looked at those challenges, those opportunities, what might fall into our lap, what actually is there a piece of work and project around some kind of data collection that we could utilize a GIS solution for, and then looked at what kind of visual maps we might want to create that will allow us those kind of almost quickest return of benefits, essentially. There was a lot of proof of concept there. So again, we've got a busy organisation, lots of stakeholders who have other priorities. So I took the approach within our team, create those proof of concepts and show what certain platforms and solutions can do. How could it improve with their help, the processes, the reporting elements, and those operational performances as well. And almost kind of flagging them up and putting them in front of them first to say, look, this is what it could look like with a bit of help. How could we move forward with this? And that's really what we've done. And that proof of concept approach has been key for driving digital transformation. And it's been key for winning people over, a part of that change management process. We know change management is always difficult. So getting them on board, getting those stakeholders on board early to understand why we should do it, and seeing some of the benefits and outputs they will receive too has been really key. There's a little bit of kind of just getting on with it. Sometimes I feel we can kind of be very tunnel vision, uh, working on the day-to-day challenges, reacting, and actually there is a little bit of carving out time and saying, actually, let's just do it. Let's just see what happens. If it doesn't improve or if we fail, we've learned the lessons around how to not approach that task digitally next time, or how do we digitally improve it in a different manner. Of course, there's cost implications and resource, and you have to weigh that up and prioritize. But so often we're kind of stuck in this in the mud essentially of just kind of churning through work as it comes in, as opposed to actually doing those little, even if it's little, those tiny bits of continuous improvement. And that's been key for our digital transformation. And now we've started to onboard many data sets at the University of Warwick from underground services, external trees, biodiversity sightings, and we're looking to take those next step forwards in IoT sensors and even drone footage, and how we start bringing that in for managing building fabric, say across our estate.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brett. That's really useful to hear. And I think there's a lot of synergy from yourself and David's comments in terms of that moving away from siloed data sets, things separately, trying to create that sort of common picture where it's easier to share and access data. So it's really useful. Thank you. And Kay, coming back to you now, because when thinking about estates modernisation and digital transformation, we often speak around or use the phrase digitalising the estate. So it'd be really useful to understand what your take on that phrase means and what could trusts or universities be prioritising in order to achieve this.
Yeah, so I think this is a really pertinent question, actually, and it's one of the first questions when I started my role in April last year. Was that it was the first question I asked many stakeholders, and I didn't get one consistent answer in respect of what that meant for either the user of systems, the areas of estates management, or suppliers, etc. I didn't actually get a consistent sort of answer to it. So it lends itself to really subjective sort of interpretation, I would say. But what I will say is, when you drill down and you look at the key components of that, for me, from the stakeholder engagement that I've done, the opinion that comes through really strong. It's about integrating digital technologies into management and operation of physical assets. So it's such as our buildings, our facilities, our working practices. It's about the integration of digital technologies within that. The idea, I suppose, is through digital transformation, it will lead to a more efficient, cost-effective, or sustainable management practices, or give innovation that will allow for greater efficiencies in the system, or indeed net zero sort of aligned targets, etc. In reality, I think that's what that means is data integration. We've talked about that already. Many people have mentioned this about doesn't mean it's one system. It means it's a combined amount of systems, but addressing the same issues and addressing the same information that we need to do the jobs that we're expected to do. So centralized systems, and a really key component of digitization is about real-time monitoring. Certainly within the NHS, and I can speak about this wholeheartedly, we look at data retrospectively all the time. That our biggest data returns, our error returns, our premises assurance model returns are retrospective from the year before. If we had that in real time and we could project the future of that, then that would be much more beneficial to aligning what we're trying to do. So implementing those systems, making sure they're interoperable, and the workforce that supports it obviously is essential. What I will say is the vision in NHS England is to have this sort of digital driven, resilient and intelligent healthcare infrastructure. Um, Achieving that is obviously through sort of a transition from analog to digital and the components that aligned to that. Encompassing leadership, collaboration is a big thing. That's not just about saying that you're talking with people, that's about real collaboration and partnership. I don't think you can underestimate that. And digital excellence to sort of enable productive and proactive estates management rather than a reactive service to the things that we do. This will obviously then empower teams, optimize our estates, and ultimately enhance patient care, because it will focus on the main sort of sections of helping us reduce the risk of critical infrastructure failures. We focused on three sort of main areas of that, and it's sort of echoing what everybody else has said really, which is leadership. So we now have a digital board. It does drive the agenda. David's on that board as a direct stakeholder into that. But we use the board to sort of drive the agenda and look at the key things that we need to do. The other thing that we do is technology. So this is about the readiness to adopt. It talks about automation of systems, data returns, and identifying barriers to the road mapping that people might do. One of the strongest things that was said to me when I was talking to people is, I don't even know where to start. So we've got to sort of give a little lever to allow that journey to start. We have 209 trusts in NHS England, all of which are working in a silo fashion and they're working on the same principles, but the way in which they're enacting them is not necessarily consistent. So we, like I said before, we don't need the same system, we need the same process that sits behind it, which is what Nick was talking about earlier. So there's got to be a change in approach, I think, to gain those wider efficiencies and the integration of streamlining our systems and consolidating that data management, ensuring really that it's compatible and it facilitates this sort of streamless interaction and exchange. The governance and the data management that David mentioned, I'll mention again, ensuring we get the right data that's collected, ensuring that the data we collect is maximising, we maximise it to the use and best effect, but making sure we own that data. So the whole principle of secure by design and that it's our data, we have access to that. I think there are some organisations that don't have direct access to their own data, which just seems crazy to some extent. Areas of focus in particular, I think where data technologies and innovations can help is surrounding energy management. I think this is quite advanced in respect of BIM modelling and digital twin modelling. Digital twin is another phrase that is used and interpreted very, very differently by people. But the whole principle of decarbonising our estate, energy efficiencies, space utilisation, and maximising investment. So the more data we get and the more intelligence we get as to what we need to do, the more we can be clear about how we're using our investment. People say, to digitise the estate, who's going to pay for that? And maybe it's a question of, well, there's no more money coming. So maybe it's a question of, well, the money that you invest currently, is it invested in the right way? So we need to sort of turn it on its head and look at that in a slightly different angle. This principle of secure by design and real-time data, again, can't be underestimated. But it'll make areas more efficient and protect the critical infrastructure, like I've said. So ultimately, our patients are not, or students from the university sector, are not negatively impacted by our physical infrastructure. The analogy I always have in my head is if a theatre goes down, it's not the patient that was due the next operation, it's the patient that's been waiting 12 months for theirs. And the impact is enormous when you look at that. If we use digital technology correctly, then maybe we can be more proactive with our approach than reactive.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kay. I think that summarises it really well and goes back to those four key themes that Nick pointed out at the beginning around people, processes, data and systems, obviously being the fundamental core of all of the things we're speaking about today. Interestingly as well, some of the points you made around energy efficiency and decarbonisation, because obviously more efficiently managing the estate and the built environment is a key way to start to reduce emissions and transition towards net zero. So coming back to you now, Brett, it would be interesting to hear how technology is enabling you to reduce carbon emissions and manage your estate in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, well, firstly, we mentioned a lot there around that centralised solution, and that's allowed us to have a much better reporting platform for us to showcase our energy usage and our building performance across campus. We're able to show reactive work measures, kind of look at how much water usage is happening within a building, and able to do that across that visual floor plan, that visual floor plate, should I say, of our digital campus has been really, really key. It's allowed us to tell a story. It's allowed us to use data to showcase our thoughts and opinions of where we think campus can be improved, and it allows leadership teams to take decisive action when they spot some of those trends and patterns and analysis, but also allow for better master planning. So when we're looking at campus development and where we can improve, those better data, that better understanding of how existing buildings perform allows us to plan for better buildings moving forward. We haven't reached the point yet, but we are currently working to add in Wi-Fi data across our estate to look at building level and floor level occupancy, and then showcasing that across that digital campus. That's our next step, and unlocking again a powerful data set, which, as I mentioned earlier, already exists. I'm not looking to create data. I'm looking to utilize what is already in the palm of our hands. And that will allow us to start to leverage that huge data set and understand, like I said, better knowledge around building occupancy and utilisation. We will build that as a static platform to start with, looking at historical data. But the following footsteps from that, when we go through that initial proof of concept phase, will be to start to see that in real time, and start to determine where our buildings are being overheated, they're using more energy than they should in relation to the occupancy, and being able to inform our BEMS teams internally, to help them manage energy usage across that system. So not heating or cooling, unused spaces. And that will really help with those scope 1 and 2 emissions. And as I said, around that digital campus or digital twin model, that technology, enables us, and senior and operational leaders to understand their assets and their building performance in a much greater way than we have previously. And that's really helping drive the university to look at how we deliver reducing emissions and meeting our targets. And knowing our utilisation will go a step further, because going back to that master planning purpose, it will provide us significant opportunities to look at where, not providing new space where there is already an underutilized space which exists with a perfectly good functionality purpose, a functionally suitable, purpose there, that we can then repurpose that space and use it as opposed to building new.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brett. I mean, really nicely put. And I think it highlights nicely the almost quick win element. Once you understand your spaces, who's in those spaces, you can start to, like you said, turn down the heating, amend things like that. That from a scope 1 and 2 emissions point of view, that's a relatively quick win when you start to think about in comparison to scope 3 and some harder to sort of review and manage pieces. So thank you for that. A term that's come up quite a lot in the discussion today, and Kay pointed this out, is digital twins, and it means different things to different people. So, Nick, I'd be interested to get your opinion on what do you perceive a digital twin to be, and what are some of the benefits of creating or adopting a digital twin for universities and NHS trusts?
Thanks, Georgina. Yeah, it's a great question. And as you say, there are lots of definitions out there for what a digital twin is. And many of them, I think, focus on things like 3D models, real-time data feeds, and potentially very advanced simulations. And yes, those things can be part of a digital twin, but in practice, I think it can be really helpful to take a broader, potentially more grounded view. So I see a digital twin as any digitized representation of a system that helps you make better decisions. So it doesn't have to be live or complex or expensive to create. It could be in the context of estates management, especially for universities and NHS trusts. It could be as simple as a well-structured dashboard or a graph or a report that brings together accurate data at the point that you need it. And I think that's a really important aspect to touch on, because most decisions about estates aren't made in real time. And I note Kay's and Brett's comments on real-time data just a few minutes ago, and I don't think we're contradicting each other. I think it's potentially a semantics thing, but we do need to be really clear about what we mean by real-time data and when real-time is necessary. Do we mean live data, as in available to the second, which might be the case if you think about room sensors feeding, temperature information and things like that. Maybe in some instances that is necessary. But do we just mean by real time that the data needs to be concurrent and timely, relative to the cycle time of the decision process that we're actually looking at? Because although some decisions might be made daily, and these could be in relation to day-to-day operational activities and potentially more reactive in nature, I would argue, and I think it's fair to say, that the more important strategic decisions are more likely to be made less frequently than that, maybe monthly or quarterly or even annually. So the key thing really is that the data is accurate and available when it counts. So although it's semantics, it is an important distinction that we need to make, because designing a system that processes live data by the second would be vastly more expensive than a system that updates, once a day. So it's perhaps something that warrants careful consideration. But if you're looking at reliable information that helps you make a smarter choice about your buildings, services, or operations, you're already working with something that could potentially be considered a digital twin. The benefits, whether in a hospital or on a university campus, are really clear. It's about better informed decisions, reduced operational costs, more efficient use of space and resources, and also progress towards sustainability goals, which I think the other panelists have touched on all of those aspects as well. I suppose my key message would be you don't need an all singing, all dancing model to start realizing those benefits. And I think that really aligns with what Brett was saying in terms of just getting on with it. I really like that. He also mentioned focusing on incremental change and gradual improvements over time. I think that's absolutely hitting the nail on the head, because just getting the basics right, which is trusted data, structured access, and the right decision-making tools, is what really unlocks value from digital twins.
Brilliant, thanks, Nick. And yeah, I think the getting the basics right and just getting on with it are probably the key takeaways. But I suppose thinking about those at the start of their digital transformation journey, it can be quite difficult to know how to get on with it or how to start even with the basics. So, David, what recommendations would you make to an NHS trust or a university at the early stages of transforming their estate? How do they just get on with it? How do they start that?
Yeah, so it's a really important question, and I think very important for considering where some of the trusts and universities are in their sort of digital journey, which I imagine for many is very early on. So I mean, we started with a strategy, and trying to set a clear vision and strategy of what we wanted to achieve. That can be influenced by the size and condition of the estate, overarching strategies of your trust or organization, and many factors that can influence exactly where you want to go. But the strategy can be as I say, as simple. It's not simple, but it can be as I'll say simple as implementing a CAFAM system, which is where we started, and it's now moving to something more broad and ambitious. But I think you need to be very honest about where you are as an organization. And generally speaking, if your digital maturity is low, then you need to start simple. And as your maturity increases, you can expand the strategy. Excuse me. I mentioned digital maturity assessments earlier, and I think they are a great place to start in helping you inform you about what your strategy should be. Another area to focus on, I think, is governance and having buy-in to what you're trying to achieve. So directorate managers, Estates and Facilities Board, NHS England Board, whatever it may be that you're reporting up to. So at MFT, we had a very clear vision about digital adoption. As an organisation, we implemented electronic patient record system, and we're being ambitious around Hospital 2.0 and the NHP programme and the digital elements that we'll introduce there. So having the good buy-in and governance in place to check and monitor your digital progress, hopefully give you the funding and, equally as important, the resource to complete the strategy. Implementing a CAFAM system, is something that really requires to ensure you get a good result, you need the resource in place. You can't underestimate the size of the challenge that is. But I think if you have buy-in and you communicate the project well, then things generally should go well. And finally, I think a fundamental area, I think Kay touched on this before, is space. So space is the core of everything that we do in estates and facilities. So it's vital that spatial records, CAD drawings, etc., are all up to date. At MFT, we're still on a long journey to update all of our spatial records, but they provide the hook for all of your data. And so to create greater insights into that data, you need to be able to link those data sets together, and quite often that's done using your spatial records. That maybe sounds simple, but we've got 28,000 spaces across the estate, so it's been a huge challenge and one that we haven't fully cracked yet. So I would say strategy, governance, and space are the key areas to start with for me.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Fantastic advice. And now moving on to our final question before we move to some of the Slido Q&A. One for you, Kay. So what are your thoughts on the future direction and strategy for NHS estates?
So in a very good sense, this is going to sound a little bit repetitive given some of the commentary from other people, but it does add synergy to our messaging, I would say. So firstly, for me, this is about getting the buy-in, particularly from trust boards. So I've been to various events, etc., spoke to numerous chief executives, and digital is on their agenda, but from an estates perspective, not so much. So it's about getting that buy-in, and we have the insightful board template that's available on the NHS England website, which gives a really nice prompt for board reporting, and we need to expose it a bit more, I would say, from a digital estates perspective. Very often it's linked to clinical activity alone. So we do need to sort of give it greater exposure. So I agree with David, getting that buy-in, getting people on board is absolutely essential. Further, sort of from a trust perspective, I think when I look at this, there's two areas. There is the legacy estate and there is the new hospital programme. The main focus of both is to get smart buildings, intelligent hospitals. So I don't think our endpoint is any different. But I mentioned earlier in the session that the idea of getting there is very different for different people. When you look at a direction and strategy for digital, sometimes you see people have the idea and have all the innovation, and they go straight to point five, which is the implementation of it. There's a host of work and activity that needs to happen in the centre of that. So for the legacy estate, which I can talk more solidly about, and the things that David's already touched on, really, I'm working collaboratively with NHP, so we're not going against each other. But we use the same language, we use the same sort of mantra, which is the think big, start small, scale fast. Those things are really key. But this isn't about throwing gadgets into a building and hoping for the best and hoping that that works and gives us some efficiencies. This is about really understanding what we have and what is our baseline data set. And I think that is where we're quite infant. So David mentioned about a digital maturity assessment. So I am progressing with that. We'll do that across 209 organisations. It's been done in a simplified form. So it's not 100 questions per activity, and it is the key areas that Nick's already mentioned. But we focus on the strategy to start with the governance surrounding it, but the people, the processes, the systems, and the data that support that. And this will help us get some information back from these 209 organisations to understand the baseline. Some people will be at level 0, some people will be at level 10, some people will be at level 5, but it will allow us to create a suite of documents that is beneficial to each organisation to help them on their digital journey, and answer some of the question, I would say, about, well, where do I start? It's not an expectation that everybody starts at the same point and ends at the same point. They're very, very different. So that modular sort of look of the data and pulling that back in and making it unique and bespoke to the individual organisations, but all on the same path of achievement. They'll get there in the end, but how they get there, like I say, will be quite different. So it creates those opportunities. So the digital maturity assessment will be done over the next 6 months and then be evaluated, and then there'll be a dashboard that will be presented back to organisations so we can drill down on each organisation. It will allow for the individual organisation road mapping, and it will allow for a national perspective of where investment might be needed, of where we can do national business cases, etc. And within that, there will be elements of the Internet of Things, innovation and technology that supports some of the activity, but quite tailored to the organisation and to the level where they are. So we're not going to ask an organisation to have a smart building that's not got an asset register. We need to start where they start. So getting those basics right, and actually it feels like it's taken a step backwards, but it will actually give the foundation line to be able to move forwards and then at pace. Obviously, and I've mentioned this throughout, probably one of my mantras is it can't be done without a workforce. So we do work collaboratively with NHP workforce, but we've also got the estates workforce, estates and facilities workforce that work currently in our organisations. And whatever new hospitals, smart buildings, etc., they need to be able to be versed to be able to work in both sectors and both camps, regardless of where their people are at on their journey and where the trusts are at. So that digital literacy framework is being developed, and a skills matrix is being developed as to what we need to do to enhance. And a wrap around that is about a cultural change for our workforce that are currently working and the future of that. So for me, it's about getting the basics right, automating activity that helps us achieve where we want to be, getting a roadmap or a starting point for each of the organisations that needs to be embedded, and allowing them to write their own strategies and embedding that through the skilled workforce, all of which will lead to the ambition of the smart buildings, intelligent hospitals, and making sure that that middle bit is done so that we have some success at the end. Thanks, Georgina.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kay. I mean, those digital maturity assessments sound like they're going to be a really good way, like you said, to help at a national level understand the picture, but also help trusts at various different stages of that journey progress and start to sort of digitalise their estate. So sounds really good. We have had some questions via Slido, but I am conscious of time. We're nearly at 11. So what we'll do is we'll collate the questions and sort of share responses in the follow-ups. But I just wanted to say a huge thanks to the panelists for their time today and for their insights, and for everyone that's joined. Thank you very much. And yeah, we'll collate the questions and share them with the recording and follow up with you then. So thank you very much again to Kay, David, Nick and Brett, and thank you for everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.